Using a dedicated camera rather than a phone can make a huge difference to the quality of your YouTube videos. But of course, that means spending money which you might not have, especially when getting started with making YouTube videos. So in this video, we'll go through the best budget cameras for YouTube in 2024. Now in this video, I'll be focusing on Sony cameras as they make a lot of aps-c cameras which have a great range of lenses. Also, they are some of the most budget-friendly and compact cameras, which makes them great for YouTube. So let's jump straight into it. And first up is the Sony a5100. Now this camera is at the lower end of the prices we'll be looking at today. And picking one up new would cost around $450. But secondhand is where to pick up this camera on a budget, as that will cost you around $290, which is a much more reasonable price for this camera. Now it can record video at 1080p at up to 60 frames per second and has a 24 megapixel sensor, making it a good all-rounder for photography, video and streaming, kind of a one-stop shop for maybe all your creative needs. It's one of the smallest cameras we'll be looking at today, making it also a perfect travel camera, having in your pocket for vlogging, or even mounting to a desk for a live streaming camera. It also has a very useful flip-up screen, which is great for vlogging. It uses the XAVC-S video format, which means that you can get 50 megabits per second data rate, which provide much more detail and will let you control highlights better than pretty much all video that you would get from a phone. This alone is a massive plus for video creators. Now, it doesn't have in-body stabilization, which does mean that your video especially will be shaky unless you're using lens with stabilization built in, but this camera does usually come with the 16 to 50mm kit lens, which does have that stabilization built in. So most of the time when you're getting started, this isn't something to worry about. But the a5100 isn't without its flaws. It's a really old camera now, first came out in 2014, so it doesn't have things like 4K video, and unfortunately it does overheat quite quickly when recording video. So worth bearing in mind, especially if you are in a warmer climate. It's also missing some nice to haves like a 3.5mm audio jack input. So this means you'll have to either use the built-in microphone for your audio, which isn't the best quality, it's not bad, but it's not the best, or use a completely separate microphone and sync up the audio afterwards. It also has an older autofocus system, but it's still pretty good. So not a perfect camera, and its new price of $450 is too much to pay for it. But that second-hand price of around $250 to $300 is much more reasonable. So it's an amazing entry point into the Sony camera world, but is still pretty good quality. I still use my a5100 from time to time, all these years later. I wouldn't say I use it as my main camera, but it's certainly still good enough for getting started on YouTube. In fact, I recently made a 2024 full review of this camera on my channel, which you can check out here. So please subscribe for more videos like this, as it helps me out a lot. So next up on the list is the Sony a6000. Now this is the most popular Sony aps-c camera they've ever made, coming out only a couple of months before the a5100. And going through the specs, you'll realize that it is incredibly similar to the a5100, but with only a couple of key differences. It shares the same sensor and has the same specs in terms of video quality and photography. So you really are just looking at the form factor difference between these two cameras. So your decision on the best out of the two comes down to the price and physical features. Similar to the a5100, you should be able to pick one up new for around $450. Again, I would say this is a little bit too much, but the second-hand market, you're much more likely to find one for about $300 to $350. The lower end of that, I think, is a very fair price for this camera. It has a larger body size compared to the a5100, and this is because it has an electronic viewfinder in addition to the monitor. Talking of that monitor, unfortunately, it doesn't flip 180 degrees like the a5100, making it harder to use for vlogging, as you can't monitor yourself easily while filming. One of the other things that makes it bigger is that it has a shoot mode wheel, which means that you can swap between aperture and shutter or auto mode much more easily, rather than having to go through the menus, which you have to do with the a5100. So if that's something you would get value from, it's definitely worth thinking about. So yes, it's a bigger camera with more physical features, and in that regard, I'd probably make this slightly more favoured towards photography use rather than video, but as I mentioned, it does support 60 frames per second at 1080p. So again, like the A5100, there's no 4K video. So if that's a deal breaker for your channel, then this camera probably wouldn't be a good fit. However, I do find it more than good enough for video and easy to use with good picture quality. It has a few of the same issues as the A5100, such as the lack of 3.5mm audio jack, and has pretty much the same autofocus system. But as I mentioned before, most of the time that autofocus system isn't going to cause you any issues unless you're doing something like shooting sports photography, for example. So the A6000 is, yes, showing its age, but if you can get one second-hand at a good price, the flexibility that it gives you, especially paired with a quality Sony E-mount lens, makes this a good all-rounder where you'll be pleasantly surprised with the quality of the photos and videos it provides. Okay, so next up, we're going to talk about the Sony A6100. Yes, all these camera names are very similar, so hopefully it all makes sense. It's similar in size to the A6000, but with much more up-to-date features. And this is because the A6100 is much newer than the A5100 and A6000. This camera came out in 2019, so 5 years newer than the other two we've talked about so far. And the naming convention of 100 increment means that it is technically the replacement for the A6000, which makes sense seeing as how much newer it is. Now, to pick one up new is around $700, so yes, quite a lot more expensive than the first few options. But shopping around, I have found them available for as little as $500, which all of a sudden starts to feel like a much more reasonable price for the features that this camera provides. So what makes it stand out from the cheaper options? Well, the big issue that I complained about with the other two cameras that is, yes, the A6100 does have 4K video at up to 30 frames per second. So if this is important for you, then this is the first camera on the list that supports it. It also has a much better autofocus system, which makes it better for animal eye focusing and tracking, which makes it way more accurate, as you can literally track an animal's eye by moving the camera around and it will keep it in focus. These kind of features really do make a huge difference when you are doing tracking shots. It also has a flip-up screen, which is great for vloggers. So if you're looking for a newer camera with much more up-to-date features, it still isn't breaking the bank, the A6100 is a great option. So this takes us to the Sony ZV-E10. And this camera, again, is another newer option. Now, whilst it's not in the alpha range, it is still very similar to the other cameras, with the same E-mount lens system. This camera came out in 2021, and new still cost around $750, which I appreciate is maybe pushing it for a budget range. But the reason I've included it is, second-hand market, you can get one for as little as $580. Again, more expensive than the others mentioned, but a great price for its features. This camera is technically in Sony's vlogging range, hence the different naming convention, and is the successor to the ZV-1 camera. But in reality, it's just like the alpha cameras. It has a 24.3 megapixel sensor, like the others, and uses the E-mount lens system, which makes this camera very similar to the others on the list. And in terms of size and form factor, it's somewhere between the A5100 and A6000 in terms of size. It doesn't have an electronic viewfinder or shoot mode wheel, instead replaced by a more prominent video record button. This camera is much more focused on video, which is why I think it's definitely an interesting choice for YouTube. It has a flip round screen, it has 4K Ultra HD video at up to 30 frames per second, and can do 1080p at up to 120 frames per second, great for slow-mo shots. It has picture profiles like S-Log and Cine included, which means you can get a much more professional finish to your videos. Now, the ZV-E10 is the camera that I use for the majority of my videos. In fact, including this one here, has been recorded almost entirely on the ZV-E10. The 4K image looks crisp and clear, and I primarily use it as a video creator, and its focus on video made it very appealing to me. I've not really looked back since picking this camera up when it was first released. The lack of EVF, of course, is a downside, as well as no shoot mode wheel, making this camera maybe a little bit less practical for adjusting your settings and composing your shot quickly. There are also some issues with the camera's rolling shutter, which in basic terms can make your video look a little bit wobbly when recording and moving the camera, but if you're using a static shot, you don't get this issue at all. And of course, this issue can be fixed in post. Now, it is worth mentioning, as much as I like the Sony ZV-E10, a Mark II version of this camera is likely to be released later this year, 2024. In fact, I feel like it might be coming quite soon. This will likely have a newer sensor with better recording modes, better picture quality, and things like that. I imagine this camera will probably cost around $800 new, so not a budget option, but worth knowing if you do have a higher budget that it might be worth holding on for. So there's a good few options there to get you started, and in my opinion, you should only buy the camera that is right for your needs. For budget photographers, I would say the A6000 is the best, and is a great all-rounder, and is definitely my budget pick if you may be going to be straying into photography. For super low budget video, I would go with the A5100. It's cheap, compact, and has a flip-up screen, meaning you can get started vlogging straight away. But just be aware of that overheating, which can sometimes be a very frustrating issue. If 4K video is a must, then the decision is between the A6100 and the ZV-E10. Both more expensive than our first two options, but add a lot of newer features that might make it worth it for you. But for a quick decision, if you're favouring photography, I would go for the A6100, and for video, the ZV-E10. And before I go, let's not forget that a huge selling point of all these cameras is the E-mount lens system, which has a huge range of lenses, and a great new lens, such as the Sigma 16mm f1.4, can make a huge difference to how good quality your videos will look. Probably more than upgrading your camera would. So let me know if you'd like me to go through a full range of my recommended lenses for YouTube in 2024. So are you looking to pick up a budget camera this year? Let me know which in the comments, or if there's any that I've missed. And if you've enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to the channel and dropping a like on the video. But until next time, see ya.